I really think that we've just been able to encapsulate the amount of difference in not only in my voice but in the kind of person I've become over these past 2.5 years.
This backstory matters because it reframes the overnight success narrative that often gets attached to talent show breakouts. Jonathan's voice wasn't a fluke or a hidden talent discovered by chance. It was the product of years of disciplined training layered on top of genuine natural ability, all happening quietly while he endured social torment most of his peers never knew about. After the split with Charlotte, the pressure on Jonathan to prove himself as a solo act was enormous. His debut solo album, released in late 2014, answered any doubts emphatically, debuting at the top of the classical album charts and making him one of the youngest tenors to ever achieve that feat. Critics praised his maturity and emotional depth, and that same year, he received an invitation to perform alongside one of opera's most legendary living tenors, an extraordinary co-sign for someone barely out of his teens. Jonathan continued building his catalog over the following years, releasing additional solo albums that blended traditional opera with more contemporary covers. He toured extensively across the UK and United States, eventually recording a concept album with a full orchestra that aired as a television special. That project included his first recorded performance of one of opera's most technically demanding arias, a piece that even seasoned professional tenors approach with caution. By any measure, Jonathan had firmly established himself as a respected solo artist, independent of the duo that had first brought him fame. Behind the chart positions and sold-out concerts, Jonathan was fighting battles that rarely made headlines. He has spoken openly in interviews about struggling with depression, a condition that became severe enough at points to force him to cancel major scheduled performances. The trauma from years of childhood bullying didn't simply disappear because he'd become successful. If anything, the pressure of public life seemed to intensify it. He's also discussed navigating a difficult relationship in his late teens with a partner who struggled with serious mental health issues of her own, an experience that added further emotional weight during a period when he was already vulnerable. Rather than hide these struggles, Jonathan gradually became more vocal about mental health, eventually co-authoring children's books focused on anti-bullying themes, hoping to help kids going through what he once endured. Then, in his late 20s, came a discovery that reframed much of his life, an autism diagnosis. Jonathan has spoken about how learning this helped him make sense of so much of his past, the social difficulties, the intense focus he brought to music, the sense of always feeling slightly out of step with everyone around him. It wasn't a label that changed who he was, but rather one that helped him understand himself, and by extension, helped him advocate for neurodiversity awareness among his fans. Alongside the internal work, Jonathan also underwent a significant physical transformation in the years following his diagnosis. After a lifetime of using food as emotional comfort, and while managing a thyroid condition, he committed to a consistent, sustainable approach to his health, daily walking goals, dietary changes, and a more disciplined lifestyle overall. Over a period of a few years, he lost a substantial amount of weight, and fans responded with overwhelming support, praising not just his appearance, but his honesty about the journey. It wasn't framed as chasing anyone else's idea of how he should look. By his own account, the changes were about feeling stronger and healthier, applying the same discipline he'd once reserved for vocal training to his physical well-being instead. These days, Jonathan continues to release new music, blending his classical roots with more contemporary material, and remains active with his loyal fan base online. He's continued performing, recording, and speaking publicly about mental health and neurodiversity, using the platform his BGT moment first gave him for something more meaningful than viral fame. As for Charlotte, she moved into musical theater, building her own career on London's West End stages. The two rarely cross paths these days, a quiet ending to a partnership that once captivated millions. Jonathan Antoine's story isn't really about a talent show loss to a dancing dog, even though that's the headline most people remember. It's about a kid who was bullied for years, found an extraordinary gift almost by accident, lost a partnership that defined his early fame, battled depression largely in private, discovered something fundamental about how his own mind works, and rebuilt his health and his confidence along the way. It's a far messier, far more human story than the 3-minute viral clip ever suggested, and that's exactly why it's worth telling in full. Picture this: a 17-year-old boy, overweight, anxious, and so nervous he can barely look at the judges, walks onto the biggest talent show stage in Britain. The crowd doesn't expect much. The judges certainly don't. And then he opens his mouth to sing, and the entire room goes silent. That boy was Jonathan Antoine, and what happened next would change his life forever, though not always in the ways anyone expected. This is the real story of the kid who shocked the world, lost to a dancing dog, and quietly battled demons most of his fans never saw. It was the spring of 2012 when Jonathan Antoine and his singing partner, 16-year-old Charlotte Jaconelli, stepped onto the Britain's Got Talent stage as a classical crossover duo. On paper, they didn't look like much. The judges barely hid their skepticism, and Jonathan, visibly uncomfortable in front of the cameras, seemed like just another hopeful who'd be forgotten by the next commercial break. Then the music started. Jonathan's voice, a deep, resonant tenor that seemed impossible from someone so young, filled the auditorium. Within seconds, the skeptical expressions melted into shock. By the time the performance ended, the judges were on their feet, and comparisons to legendary tenors were already being thrown around. It was the kind of moment reality television dreams of. An underdog nobody believed in, proving everyone wrong in under 3 minutes. The clip spread fast. News outlets picked it up, and within days, Jonathan and Charlotte were international news. For a teenager who had spent years feeling invisible, the sudden explosion of attention must have been overwhelming in ways that are hard to imagine. The duo continued advancing through the competition, performing emotionally charged ballads that left audiences in tears. By the time the live final arrived, most viewers assumed the trophy was already theirs. But Britain's Got Talent has never been just about talent. It's about entertainment, novelty, and unpredictability. In the end, Jonathan and Charlotte placed second, beaten by a dog and handler dance act that captured the public's imagination in a completely different way. It was a gut punch of a result, and one that Jonathan has spoken about candidly in later interviews, describing the strange mix of pride and heartbreak that came with losing on such a public stage. Here's the twist almost nobody expected. Losing the competition didn't end their career, it arguably launched it. Within a day of the final, talk show host and music mogul Simon Cowell had already begun negotiating a recording contract with the pair. Not long after, the deal was finalized, and Jonathan and Charlotte signed with Cowell's record label for a sum reported in the 7 figures. Their debut album arrived just months later, blending classical arias with more accessible crossover tracks. It performed well commercially, climbing into the upper reaches of the UK album charts and selling hundreds of thousands of copies. Suddenly, 2 teenagers who had been mocked and underestimated were touring internationally, recording documentaries, and being treated as bona fide stars. But fame at that age, especially fame built on a single viral moment, comes with its own kind of pressure. Behind the glossy promotional photos and sold-out shows, tension was quietly building between the 2 singers. Jonathan was drawn toward pure classical opera, the kind of repertoire that had defined his training from childhood. Charlotte, meanwhile, felt a pull toward musical theater and more contemporary material. Their second album hinted at this divide, including more solo material from each of them than the public might have noticed at first listen. By early 2014, the cracks had become impossible to ignore. Jonathan and Charlotte announced they were ending their partnership, both having been offered individual recording contracts. The announcement was framed diplomatically, full of gratitude for what they'd built together, but the press speculated endlessly about the real reasons behind the breakup. Years later, Jonathan offered a more grounded explanation. He described their partnership as something that had given him the confidence to even attempt something like Britain's Got Talent in the first place. But he was honest that neither of them had ever truly seen themselves as part of a permanent duo. Both had built their training around solo performance, and as they grew older and more secure in their own artistic identities, going separate ways became the natural next step rather than some dramatic falling out. What followed was something sadder than a public feud, a quiet drifting apart. The 2, who had been close friends for years before their television fame, gradually lost touch. Jonathan later admitted in interviews that the demands of a touring music career simply didn't leave much room for maintaining old friendships, even ones that had once felt unbreakable. Despite persistent rumors and fan speculation about romance between them, both have always maintained that their relationship was strictly professional and platonic, more like siblings than anything else. To really understand how Jonathan got to that BGT stage, you have to go back much further, to a childhood that was anything but easy. Jonathan was bullied relentlessly from an extremely young age, mocked for his weight and his differences in ways that would leave lasting scars. Like many children who feel like outsiders, he found comfort in two things: food and music. It was a secondary school singing teacher who first recognized that Jonathan's voice was something extraordinary. Under her guidance, he began training seriously, eventually auditioning for multiple prestigious London music conservatories as a young teenager. He was accepted into all of them, ultimately choosing a junior program at one of the country's top music academies. Around this time, he began racking up local competition wins and award scores, so high they set records, slowly building the technical foundation that would later stun the BGT judges.